Hello and welcome to The Anxious Adventurer. I'm Katie Schlegel, your host here on the Anxious Adventurer podcast, and I'm an anxious adventurer. I know that may sound contradicting, but I'm here to tell you that if the thought of traveling somewhere brings up those feelings of anxiety or stress, you've come to the right place. I've traveled to over 17 countries around the world. I've lived in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and I've trekked across South America solo. I don't say these things to impress you. Nope, that is not what I'm here for. I say these things to let you know that every single one of those experiences had moments where my anxiety made me feel like I could not do it. So if that's how you feel, or have ever felt, you're not alone. My hope for you, my dear anxious adventurer, is that you are inspired by these travel stories so that you too will be swept off into the world that traveling can open up for you. You just have to step out your door. And don't you worry, I am right here beside you. I'm going to keep this intro pretty short and sweet today because I want to jump in and get to what we have in store for this episode. In my last episode, I mentioned how Mariposa Skies, my online ethical fashion boutique, got started with shopping in the world markets. And today, I'd like to tell you all about my very first buying trip. It's been a while, I know, so dust off those passports because we're headed to Marrakech, Morocco. Welcome to Marrakech, Morocco, a city of tradition, hospitality, and genuine souls. Morocco is located in northern Africa, just beneath Spain. It overlooks the Mediterranean Sea to the north and the Atlantic Ocean to the west. Its official predominant religion is Islam, and the official languages are Arabic and Berber. The Moroccan dialect of Arabic and French are also widely spoken. Moroccan culture is a mix of Arab, Berber, and European cultures. Its capital is Rabat, while its largest city is Casablanca. The geography of Morocco spans from the Atlantic Ocean to mountainous areas to the Sahara Desert. Marrakech is the fourth largest city in Morocco. It is situated west of the foothills of the Atlas Mountains. It comprises of an old fortified city packed full of vendors with their stalls known as the Medina. Today, it is one of the busiest cities in Africa and serves as a major economic center and tourist destination. Marrakech has the biggest traditional market known as the souk in Morocco. It is pronounced a couple different ways, but throughout this podcast, I will be pronouncing it as the souk. With some 18 souks selling wares ranging from traditional Berber carpets to amazing fashion for both men and women to whatever you need, including modern consumer electronics. My first trip to Marrakech was by train from Casablanca. They have a really amazing railway, and if you ever are in that region, I encourage you to buy a ticket and take a ride. Upon arrival, my friend and I stepped off the train into what seemed like another world. My senses were immediately overwhelmed with the sights, sounds, colors, and smells that were swirling all around me. People were pushing by me as to get to their next destination. Everything felt so unfamiliar, yet felt so at home at the same time, which to me always gives me a clue that I may already somehow have a connection to this place. To be honest, at first I was a bit scared, not of my surroundings or anything. It was a completely new and different experience. I had never been to Northern Africa, and we had just spent a week in Barcelona, Spain. It was a little bit of a culture shock for all my senses. So much was happening, and the city felt like it was in a constant state of motion. I took a deep breath and soon realized that my fear was actually excitement. In my 40 years of life, I've realized that oftentimes those two emotions can feel very similar in my body. So, taking that deep breath really helped me stay grounded and in the moment. We had scheduled a driver from the riad we were staying at to pick us up at the train station. When I first did my research, I thought, we don't need a driver. That's so fancy. But I'm glad we did, because I would not have been able to navigate the taxi system on my first step off the train. It takes a little know-how to negotiate a price as well as knowledge to know what is an appropriate price to pay. And like I said, I was a bit overwhelmed at that moment. Our driver grabbed our bags and got us in the car, and we were off. Driving through the streets of Marrakech was like a mix of old world and new world dancing together in this sort of beautiful, chaotic dance. At first, I couldn't make heads or tails of it. We came to a stopping point just on the outskirts of the Medina, the old part of the city. The driver instructed us to get out, and at that point, I had no clue what was going on, and my friend and I just looked at each other like, what are we doing? What's going on? This didn't look like the place we were staying at. In fact, far from it. It was then that a kind man with a huge smile on his face and not so many teeth grabbed our bags and put them in his wheelbarrow, motioning with his hand for us to follow him. I looked at the driver and he just said, "Go," and he waved his hand goodbye. And then I looked at my friend and we went. These are the moments in travel that can be a little frustrating or a little overwhelming. You don't quite know what's going on, you don't know the language, and you don't understand the process. And to a person like me, it's when the anxiety creeps up. But I've also learned that part of the process of traveling to other countries is learning how to surrender and let go of trying to control the outcome and allowing it to just flow. There's something beautiful about that process. That being said, I will say this. It is easier said than done because at that moment, I had no clue what was going on, and the guy who had our bags just kept looking back at us and smiling and waving his hand for us to follow him. We turned down one of the side entrances to the Medina. It was a walking street, so there were no cars allowed, but about halfway down the street, the man with our bags turned into this small alley-looking way. I had read about the riads being tucked away amongst a maze of homes, businesses, and hotels. But I was not prepared for these low-lit pathways that turned this way and that. We would have never figured out how to find our riad on our own. So I was grateful for our guide, even though I still had no clue what was really going on. We took a left, then a right, then another left, and maybe a few more rights, or was it a left in there somewhere? At that point, I was thoroughly confused. But alas, upon our last left, or maybe it was a right, we made it to the front door of our riad. It was a pretty wooden door, but to be honest, nothing like what I had seen in the photos online. My friend and I looked at each other as we waited for someone to greet us. A friendly Moroccan woman opened the door and welcomed us to enter. She gave our smiling guide a tip for his troubles, and he was off to what I only assumed was his next pickup. As we entered the riad, my nose was immediately hit with the smell of roses. It was breathtaking and nothing like the outside. It had a beautiful tiled fountain placed in the middle of a courtyard with several stories of rooms surrounding it. We checked in and our bags were placed in a room. We were then led up to the rooftop where there were tables and little nooks to snuggle into. But that was not the most amazing part. As we turned the corner, my eyes were met with this amazing 360-degree view of Marrakech. I was in awe. We found a spot to sit, and when we did, I felt myself finally take a breath. I felt like I was holding it ever since our bags were put in that wheelbarrow. Just as soon as we sat down, we were brought our very first serving of Moroccan mint tea. Well, it's just called mint tea there, but it's the most amazing mint tea you'll ever taste, so I feel like there needs to be a distinction. My friend and I just smiled and laughed while we sipped our mint tea and talked about what just happened. This riad was like a breath of fresh air amongst the constant movement of the Medina that was literally just a stone's throw away. It was so peaceful and quiet, truly an oasis, and one I'd be very grateful for in the days to come. Since we arrived late that day, we opted to have dinner in the riad and go to bed early because the next day we were headed out into the souks for my very first shopping experience. With a good night's sleep and an amazing rooftop breakfast, we headed out to the main plaza. However, we first had to find our way out to the plaza. This took a little time and a couple wrong turns, but with the help of the front desk manager and a map, we eventually found our way. I always say it is a good idea to know a little history about the marketplace you shop in. It allows you to really appreciate it just that little bit more. So here's a little history on the souks. A souk is a marketplace. They can be found all over Northern Africa and even Western Asia. The souks were originally known as open marketplaces. Typically, they were outside the city centers at places where travelers could stop on their long journeys, and the merchants were able to display their merchandise for sale. Arriving caravans in the cities were oftentimes infrequent, and being as such, a souk was set in place to include cultural festivals as well as social events, thus deeming the souks a major social function for the city or town it took place in. A souk was not only a place that served the community in a commercial way, but historically, the souks have always been a place of gathering and meeting for the people. Fast forward to now, many of the souks are now located in the urban city centers, like Marrakech. They are typically divided into sections depending on the types of products the merchants are selling, and are most commonly located within narrow streets named after the product that is being sold. Examples of this would be the gold souk, the spice souk, the fabric souk, the leather souk, and so forth. More permanent souks, such as the one in Marrakech, always have sections for money exchanges, services, and selling durable goods, like fashion. Before entering the souks of Marrakech, you must first walk through the Plaza Jame Havana. This is the plaza where everything begins. It is the gateway into the souks and where my first buying trip began. The plaza is an entity in its own right. It lives and breathes so many different things throughout the day. In the morning, it can be a little bit more quiet as booths and selling areas are being set up. Near the evening, though, food vendors come out and start cooking any and every Moroccan delicacy you can ever imagine. When my friend and I started out into the souks, we didn't venture too far. Like I said, it's a maze, and if you don't remember where you came from, you can quite easily get lost and not know how to get out without some help. On our first day, we just looked and took in all the shops and sights and sounds. It can be quite overwhelming as there's commerce and business and everyday life happening all around you. Now, since I have a background in cultural anthropology, I have learned to be a great observer. Sometimes my friends tell me I stare just a little too long, but I've been able to learn quite a lot about a culture, or in this case, a marketplace, with my skills of observation. So when we had our fill of the souks and the Medina, my friend and I found refuge, once again, on our rooftop at our riad with that delicious mint tea. As I went over what I saw that day, I came up with some tips on how to navigate the souks of Marrakech, and I'd like to share them with you. Now that you have a little background on the souks, navigating them is another story. The souks in Morocco, in particular Marrakech, as I've said, can be really confusing. Whether you're buying something or simply trying to walk through them, it can be overwhelming. To help you in your endeavor, here are my top 10 tips to navigate the souks of Marrakech, Morocco. Now, I'm just going to run through them, so feel free to pause and jot down some notes. Tip number 10. The souks can be quite crowded, so I would suggest carrying as little as possible. I usually carry a small crossbody bag and have it in front of me with a scarf tied around the top of it. I also put one hand on it so I know where it is constantly. Nothing has ever happened, but sometimes you are literally walking among a crowd of 20 or more people. And with the streets being so narrow, you are all squished together. So it's just smart to know where your purse is at all times. Tip number 9. When entering the maze that is the souks, At the very least, make mental notes of where you are. I would even go as far as taking pictures on your phone or camera of the overhead signs or the shops on the corners when the paths split. Trust me, you can get lost quite easily. Tip number 8. If you do get lost, ask the shop owners for help finding your way back to where you need to go. Shop owners are your best bet when asking for directions. Tip number 7. If you're worried about getting lost, simply go straight in and straight out. It will negate any worry of not being able to find your way out of the maze that is the souks. Tip number 6. Stay to the right. Remember this one? This is one of those unwritten rules while navigating the souks. Simple enough. However, you will find yourself wandering because there are so many things that will grab your attention. Remember, the souk is a marketplace as well as a place of work. Many people are coming in and out, and not all of them are on foot. There are small trucks, motorbikes that zoom past, as well as mules on carts. Just be aware of your surroundings, stay to the right, look right and left before you cross over, and you'll be fine. Tip number 5. Haggling 101. Start at offering 30 to 50% less than what the shop owners offer. Yes, it may seem like you're lowballing it, and some may act like they totally have taken offense, but it's all part of the experience. They will counter your offer, don't worry, and that is where you want to be. It's a way to start the conversation. Tip number 4. Please remember, while negotiating for the price, always be respectful and smile. Many shop owners want to generate a connection with their customers, and they are the ones you want to do business with and buy your items from. Tip number 3. Sometimes when you don't have enough money with you because you'll buy so many wonderful things, it can actually give you an upper hand. This was never done intentionally on my part, but many times stating, "This is all I have," will get you a good price. Though be mindful of this way of haggling. There was one time when I felt terrible for not having enough money after negotiating my price, so I started to walk away embarrassed. The shop owner literally ran after me and said he would give it to me for what money I had left. Please note, do not do this on purpose in order to get a ridiculously low price. Always be respectful of the shop owners and remember, they have to make a living too. Tip number 2. To get the best deals, go deeper into the souks in the late afternoon between 3 p.m. and 4 p.m. Not many tourists or even locals go very deep into the souks, so the shop owners can be very eager to make a sale. Other shops that are located near the entrances get so much business from tourists that their prices are many times more expensive because of the location of the shop. And tip number 1. Some shop owners will ask you to come back the next day for some Moroccan mint tea. Ladies, please know they are not trying to hit on you. This is a part of the experience as well. It's a sign of good faith. Say yes and get out of your comfort zone. It will lead you to having a wonderful experience of true Moroccan culture and generosity. There are many other things I'd love to tell you about my first buying trips in the souks, but those will have to wait for another time because I want to tell you about one last experience I had during my first buying trip in the souks of Marrakech. So now's the time to hit pause, grab a cup of mint tea, and sit back while I tell you the tale of my tea time in the souks. While traveling all over Morocco, there are many Moroccan traditions to experience. One of my favorites is the Moroccan mint tea. You can get it everywhere in Morocco. It is so fresh and so delicious. Within this tradition, there is another opportunity to experience Moroccan culture. While shopping the souks of Marrakech, I was honored to actually pull up a chair and live it firsthand. What, you may ask, is this tradition? Well, tea time in the souks, of course. It is one of the time-honored Moroccan traditions that many shop owners love to partake in with their customers. When all the negotiations are finished and your merchandise is bought and paid for, the shop owner may ask you to join them for a cup of tea. When asked, I encourage you to accept their invitation. It is simply an act of friendship that you will remember for the rest of your life. And here is my personal story. My tea time in the souks experience was with a gentleman named Omar. My friend and I had been to his shop the day before, and I came back to purchase his wonderful wallets and purses. Before we negotiated our price, he asked if we would like to join him for some tea. We, of course, gladly obliged. After all, we loved the tea. If there was one thing I couldn't get enough of in Morocco, it was the mint tea. He ordered the tea, to which he jokingly referred to as Berber whiskey. I should note the humor behind this because Berber people do not partake in drinking alcohol. It's according to their customs, but they do drink a lot of mint tea. The Berber people, also known to many as the Moors, are from northern Africa. Their customs are old and from ancient times. Omar was from the south of Morocco. He was of Berber descent and spoke Berber, Arabic, French, and English. As he poured the tea, moving the silver kettle up high into the air, the traditional way of pouring Moroccan mint tea that leaves the tea frothy and so delightful, we talked about each other's families. I found out his family was very much like my own. Omar's wife was a teacher, as was my mom. He had 2 sons and 1 daughter, the same as my family, 2 older brothers and myself being the youngest girl. He asked if we were enjoying Marrakech, to which I enthusiastically said, yes. Though our time was brief, Omar is a person I will forever remember. His presence was loving and gentle. He was genuine and wholehearted. You may ask how I know this to be true. The fact is, I don't, but what my intuition told me, and what my heart said to believe, was that he embodied the essence of these time-honored Moroccan traditions. This man was a true example of the heart and soul of who the Moroccan people are. The Moroccan traditions are simple and warming, but have such a life-changing impact if you allow them to. Moroccans are beautiful people who welcome strangers into their customs, home, and hearts to drink and have tea with them. I distinguish the two because you can drink tea almost anywhere in Morocco. But to truly have tea with a Moroccan will change your perspective. It will give you a glimpse into a culture, a tradition, and a person, reminding you to be kind, generous, and open to each other's experiences. I will never forget my tea time in the souks. It changed my perspective on how a simple act of offering tea to a stranger can impact them for the rest of their life. This one experience is why I started to include 2 bags of tea with each purchase at Mariposa Skies. I send it as a thank you, but also in the hopes that those who receive it will sit down and have a cup of tea with a friend, a loved one, or maybe even a stranger. Each place I've traveled to for Mariposa Skies seems to have a tea culture. And I'll dive into those traditions in some upcoming episodes, but for today, I will bring this episode to a close. I hope you enjoyed learning about my first buying trip in the souks and gleaned some knowledge about how to navigate them. And remember, if you ever find yourself in the souks being offered a cup of mint tea, I hope you consider partaking in the old-time tradition of tea time in the souks. Before we end this episode, this is the part where I ask you for those travel stories. I know I'm like a broken record here, but I really would love to start sharing them here on the podcast. If you have a travel story where you learned a significant life lesson or where you met someone along the way, like Omar, that had a big impact on your life, I want to invite you to come on the podcast and be one of my guests for a future episode. Or if you're not up for that, you can write in and tell me all about that travel experience. Please reach out and get in touch with me at anxiousadventurersclub@gmail.com. Like I've always said, I want to start featuring you, my listeners, and your amazing travel adventures here on the podcast. If you're writing in for your travel experience, please put in the subject line, My Travel Experience, and then fill that email with your story or stories. And remember to include any tips or lessons you learned along the way. Like I've always said, and keep on saying, I want this podcast to become a co-creation between you and me, and really start to help all those anxious adventurers out there become more brave and knowledgeable. I can't wait to see your stories in my inbox. Okay, that concludes this episode. I hope you took some notes and feel like you got some good tips on how to shop the souks of Marrakech, and also had a fun adventure, maybe on your first trip to Morocco. Have questions for me? I'd love to answer. Just hit me up on Instagram at Mariposa Skies. You can DM me at any time. I love to talk travel and help out any way that I can. Instagram is also the place where I share all the photographs, videos, and visuals for each podcast episode. That's also where you'll see all the fashion for Mariposa Skies and the artisans who make it. As always, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you learned a little, laughed a little, and my hope is that it left you with some things to think about. All right, enjoy that Moroccan mint tea this week. Until next time, my dear anxious adventurers. Ciao. Besos.